Now, the next chapter is ratios. The relationship between two quantities of the same kind can be compared. Now, here the major thing that we are trying to do, or the major thing that we are invited to do, is by comparing the quantities. Now, when we compare the quantities, that is where we will be able to get the comparison between two or more things in any form. So that is known as the comparison part. Now here the difference method and the division method, these are the two methods that will be used to compare the things. Okay, so the relationship between the two quantities of same kind. So if you see here, the same kind has to be used, and if you have too much of difference, then comparing both of them are very difficult. So in those cases, we will have to make sure that it is of the same kind, and only the same kind values can be compared. In difference method, quantities are compared as one quantity which is more or less of another quantity. We will keep one quantity as constant, and we will try to compare the other quantity. Now in those cases, we will be using difference method, which will give us a clear difference of one of the feature. So in division method, the quantities are compared as how many times one quantity is to another. So in division method, we are finding the proportion. We are trying to get the things in proportion with each other. Okay, so that will be the division method. In difference method, we will compare from one quantity to other quantity, and we will check which is more or which is less. And when it comes to the division method, we are comparing how many times one quantity is equal to the other quantity. Now let us take an example here to understand. Given the two quantities, say marks in quantitative analysis of two students. This is nothing but maths. So maths subject marks in of two students are given. Now these two students marks are being compared. Now let us see how the comparison happens. Now the quantitative analysis of two students A and B are 60 and 90 respectively. If the marks of A is 60 and the marks of B is 90, then how do we compare it? That is what we are trying to understand. Under the difference method, marks are compared like student B has scored 30 marks more than student A. So if you take the difference method, this is how we will compare. We will compare saying that student B has got 30 marks more than student A. Okay, so this is how we compare. But or the other way of comparison is student A has got 30 marks less than student B. So if you see the marks, one is 60, one is 90. There is a 30 difference. So in difference method, we are comparing between A and B and their marks. So we can say that one person, that is A, has scored 30 marks less than B, that is 60 is less than 90, or we can say B has scored more marks than A, wherein that is 30 difference. So that is the difference way or difference method which we will be using. Now next, when it comes to the division method. Okay, when it comes to the division method, now one second. When it comes to division method, then we will be now when it comes to division method, we will represent them in proportion. Now in proportion, what will happen is 60 is to 90. Okay, now how did we get 60 is to 90? Now first see the marks of A. Now what is the marks of A that is given? Marks of A is 60 and marks of B is 90. So 60 is to 90. Okay, so that is one way of getting the division method, or that can also be represented in a simplified format. Okay, if not, you can just divide 60 by 90 and you can get the decimal point, and you can write this as, that means students A marks is 0.666 times of marks of student B. So here we are comparing it with times. In division method, we are comparing it with times, but in the difference method, we are just finding the difference between the marks and we are representing that. Okay, so these two are important things for you to understand as the basics of comparison. Okay, now here under division method, you can either take 60 by 90 and represent by saying A has got 0.666 times of marks of B, or you can do the other way round. 90 by 60 if you do, then that means student B's marks is 1.5 times of students A marks. Now if you remember, we have solved lot of questions under equation where we have this 2 times no, one's age is 3 times the other, 3.5 times the other. We have seen all those problems, right? So in those cases also they are using the same concept, that is division method. So the comparison of quantities of same kind in division method is known as ratio. So when you take these things, especially 60 by 90 and 90 by 60, this part is the comparison of the same kind of quantities. Now here this 90 and 60 are the marks of math subject of two students, that is A and B. Right? So we are comparing two quantities here, and that is known as ratio. So if you see here, the ratio is 1.5 is to 1. So if this is 1, 60 is 1, 90 will be 1.5. Okay, so that is known as the ratio. Now let us understand what is ratio in detail. So we understood the concept behind the ratio. Now let us understand what do you mean by ratio in detail. So if A and B are two quantities, now there we had a student A and B and their maths marks. Correct? Now here A and B are two quantities of same kind. What is the same kind? Maths marks is the same kind. Okay, then the fraction A by B. Now we divided 90 by 60 or 60 by 90. So this is the fraction A by B. This is called the ratio of A and B. So when you represent it like this, it's called ratio of A and B, which is nothing but 90 is to. When you put a semicolon, two dots, if you put like this, it is called as is to. Okay, is to 60. This is how you represent a ratio. When A and B are two quantities of the same kind, then the fraction A by B, that is 90 by 60 in our example, is called as ratio of A and B. Did you all understand the meaning of the ratio? Okay, good. Now let us see further. Thus, the ratio of one quantity to another is the relation in respect of the number of times that one quantity contains the other. So let us read this once again. The ratio of one quantity to another in the relation in respect of number of times. How many times that one quantity will have the other quantity. So this is expressed in fraction and obtained by dividing the first quantity by the second quantity. For your easy understanding, the marks that we saw, that is 90 by 60, whatever we saw here, one contains in another. Now this 60 is already there in 90. After 60 only you will get 70, 80, 90. Correct? So one is already contained in another, which we are expressing. So the ratio between two numbers or two quantities is generally represented in the following format. How do we represent? Firstly, the ratio of A and B. The ratio of A and B. Okay, or it is called as A is to B. Okay, just hold on. Okay, sorry for that. Let's continue. So the ratio between A and B is generally represented as the ratio of A and B, they can say, or they can just write it as A is to B. So if you see here, it is read as A is to B. Okay, or you can also write it as A by B. This also will be applicable, or this also will be accepted. So that is the meaning of ratio, where we compare the two quantities of same kind, where the fraction of A by B is there, and we say it as, we read that as A is to B or A by B. Any doubts in the meaning part here? Yeah. Can we continue? Yes. Now, moving further, the quantities A and B are called the terms of the ratio. So, a ratio A and B are there, and they are of the quantities of same kind, where we will be comparing them. Now, this comparison can be called as ratio under division method, and these A and B are called as terms of the ratio, and each of the A and B has a name. Now, what is the name? For the A, that is the first term, what we see in the ratio is called as antecedent. Okay, so the first term is called as the antecedent, and the second term B is called as the consequent. So the first term is called what? Antecedent, and the second term is called as consequent. Okay, this you have to remember. Then let us one last time, let us see the definition of a ratio. So ratio can be defined as a relation between any two or more numbers expressed in the same unit, which is found out in some arithmetic form. So we are applying the mathematics or statistics here. So it's a relation between any two or more numbers expressed in the same unit, which is found out in some arithmetic form with the view to making a meaningful comparison between two or more related phenomena. So when there are two or more quantities which is given to us, we represent that in a form, we represented in a form wherein we will be able to analyze their relation. Okay, that is called as a ratio. Okay, so that is the definition of the ratio that we are supposed to understand. Once again, the relation between any two or more numbers which is expressed in the same unit. We cannot compare different units. It has to be in the same unit, which is found in some arithmetic form. What is arithmetic form? A by B. There is a division involved. So that is an arithmetic form. Okay, and with the view of giving a meaningful comparison. Now, when we give a meaningful comparison, that will give us the resultant which is very, very related and which we will be able to understand. So that is the definition of a ratio. Understood? Any doubts still here? Okay. Now, moving on, we have to understand few of the important points before solving the problems. So, what are the points? The terms of the ratio must be of the same unit. That is what we have been learning from the definition. So, if you want to compare, it has to be marks of the students between two students or between two subjects, or between 2 rupees, between kgs. Okay, we cannot compare, or we cannot give a ratio between marks and income. Marks is a different unit, income is a different unit. Now we cannot compare these two and give you the ratio, right? So in these cases, we will not be able to do the comparison and we cannot give the ratio for this. So always the ratio must be of the same unit. This is the first important thing. Then ratio has no unit of measurement. So ratios you will not have, see as the example given, 50 marks, 60 marks, that marks is not required to be written. Kgs, hours, you need not write the unit of measurement. If you just write the ratio 50 is to 60, 2 is to 1, 5 is to 4, 8 is to 9, like that, if you just write the numbers, that is enough. Okay, that unit of measurement of kgs, hours, marks, quintals, tons, liters, that need not be mentioned. Okay, so that is the second important point, where ratio has no unit of measurement. And then a ratio remains unaltered if its antecedent and consequent are multiplied or divided by the same scalar number. Now let us take, for example, if I take this ratio 5 is to 6 and if I multiply, okay, if I multiply a same number to both of them, they will be in the same ratio. I'm not talking about the same number. Now let's take, for example, I am multiplying 3. I'm multiplying 3 and 3. Okay, so 5 3s are 15. Okay, I'm multiplying 3 and 3 to both of them. So let's take, for example, I'm multiplying 3. So I will have 15 is to 18. Okay, 15 is to 18 is the ratio we get. Now, when I cancel this ratio, when I do the cancellation, again I can get back to 5 is to 6. So when you have multiplied using one digit, one scalar digit, yeah, we get 15 is to 18. So when we get a scalar digit means one digit. Now if I multiply it with 3, then I can get back to its original ratio format. Okay, now similarly you can divide the, let us take this one, 50 by 60. If I divide this by 10 and this by 10 also, 0 0 0 0 will get cancelled and you get 5 by 6. Sorry, 5 is to 6. So which means the unit has not changed. The ratio measurement or the ratio has not changed from its original form. So it will remain unaltered. Correct, 5 is to 6. So it will remain unaltered. it will not change. Okay, so that is what they are trying to say. Then generally a ratio is expressed in its lowest possibility unitary terms. That means this 50 is to 60 is reduced to 5 is to 6. Now if you see 2000 is to 4000, you can easily write this as 2001 za, 2002 za. Correct? So 2001, 2, and the lowest possibility number that you can give for this is 1 is to 2. Okay, the lowest possibility number that you can give is 1 is to 2. So that is what they are trying to say. You have to always express the ratio at its lowest possible terms. Now here if you see 50 is to 60, 5 is to 6 is the lowest possibility term. You cannot cancel both of them again because 5 is a prime number. So you'll have to leave it at 5 only. Next, to compare two or more ratios, convert them into equivalent ratios as to make the denominations of the ratios equal. So if you make the denominator part of the ratios as equal, then it is much more easy to compare two or more ratios. Okay, so when you're comparing two or more ratios, two ratios, we know how do we compare. If it is more than two ratios, then we have to convert them into equivalent ratios. Okay, when we convert them or when we change that into equivalent ratios, then it is quite good for us to solve it easily. So these are the important points which you have to understand, wherein the ratios must be in same terms of comparison, and ratios has no unit of measurement. The ratios will remain unaltered if you divide and divide and multiply by a same number, and ratios has to be expressed in the lowest possible numbers, and when you compare two or more ratios, convert them into equivalent ratio to make it easier for you to solve them. Okay, did you all understand the important points? Any doubts until there? Okay. Now let us learn the different forms of ratio. So this can be asked for 2 marks. Okay, each of them they can ask you define compound ratio, what is duplicate ratio. Like this they can ask this for 2 marks. Okay, so we'll just see one by one what are the types or different forms of ratios. Now first one is unit ratio. Now in unit ratio, it's a ratio of equality in which both the terms are equal. Very easy. So if you see here, 1 is to 1, 3 is to 3, 5 is to 5, 10 is to 10. So it is equal. The antecedent is equal to the consequent. The first term is called as antecedent. The second term is called as consequent. Okay, so if both the numbers are equal, then it is called as equality ratio or unit ratio. Understood unit ratio? Okay. Now next is inverse or reciprocal ratio. Now when it comes to inverse ratio, the ratio is said to be inverse of the other if their product is 1. If you multiply A into B and if you multiply B into A, okay, the product should be the same number. Okay, in other words, an inverse ratio is one which is obtained by interchanging the antecedent and consequent. So we are interchanging A in the place of B and B in the place of A. When we do this, that is what we get in the inverse ratio. Okay, so we will be using a few of these ratios while we are solving the problems. So this is an inverse or a reciprocal ratio. Now the next one is compound ratio. Let A is to B and C is to D are two ratios. So here we have two sets of ratios, that is A is to B is one ratio and C is to D is another ratio. Then ratio of A into C is to B into D is called as compound ratio of two ratios, that is A is to B and C is to D. So if you have understood what they have done here, they have just multiplied both the antecedents. So if you see, this is the antecedent of the ratio, this is the consequent. Here this is the antecedent, this is the consequent. So antecedents have been multiplied and then consequence also has been multiplied. So that is why you get A into C is to B into D. So this is called as a compound ratio. Did you understand the first three ratios? Unit, inverse and compound? Okay. Then the next ratio is duplicate ratio. Now duplicate ratio is when a ratio is compounded by itself. When the ratio is multiplied by itself, then that is called as a duplicate ratio. If A is to B is a ratio, then if we multiply A into A, which will become A square. And if I multiply B into B, it will become B square. And this will be the duplicate ratio of A is to B. So you can see here 2 is to 3, 2 square, 3 square is the duplicate ratio of 2 is to 3. When you raise it to the power of 2, that is called as duplicate ratio. Clear? Understood duplicate ratio? You just have to square the ratios given. And the next one is subduplicate. When in duplicate ratio you square them, so subduplicate means you will have to find the square root of them. Okay, subduplicate means find the square root of the terms of the ratio. So that is known as subduplicate ratio. A subduplicate ratio is one which is obtained by taking square roots. Okay, Gauri, I'll explain it. Okay, so you have to take the square root of each of the terms of ratio, that is known as subduplicate. Duplicate ratio is just squaring the terms of the ratio. No matter which term they have given to you, just square them, find the square. Now let's take for example, there is a term like this, 9 is to 7 is the ratio. Now if they ask you to find the duplicate of it, you will have to just square it. 9 square is to 7 square. Okay, what is 9 square? 81 is to 7 square is 49. Correct? So this will be our duplicate ratio of 9 is to 7. So that is duplicate and subduplicate ratio. In duplicate ratio, you will square the numbers. In subduplicate ratio, you will find the square root of the numbers. Next is triplicate ratio. Now triplicate ratio is nothing but when you cube the numbers. Duplicate means 2 times. Triplicate means 3 times. Okay. Now in triplication or triplicate ratio, you just have to cube the numbers. So let us take the same example. 2 cube is to 3 cube. So you are cubing the numbers. 3 times you are multiplying the numbers. That is why it is called as cubing. So triplicate 3 times. Are you all able to follow? Are you all getting it? How it is done? Yeah, and then you have subtriplicate. Now in subduplicate, you understood, or in subduplicate, you found out the square root of it. In subtriplicate, you just have to find the cube root of the number. So let us see this example. 2 cube is 8. 3 cube is 27. This is the triplicate ratio. But when it comes down to the reverse, 27 is the subtriplicate. What is the subtriplicate ratio of 27? It is 3. Why it is 3? 3 cube is 27. 3 threes are 9, 9 threes are 27. Then 4 fours are 16, 16 fours are 64. So that is why 64 is there. Understood? Understood triplicate and subtriplicate ratio? Okay. The next one is continued ratio. Now in continued ratio, you will have the second number will be continued. Now if you see here, see firstly the definition is when the relationship between three or more aspects of same kind is expressed in the form of ratio. So if you see this example, 3:4:6:8. Now how do I represent this? 3